Hi everyone, I'm recording this at 10 to 10 on Monday night. The event has finished, but we forgot to record the introduction. So here I am just pretending that this is the start of the event to be able to stitch it on to the front, to the end of all the other, the rest of the recording. So, hi everyone, and welcome to Women in Sustainability Glasgow. It's amazing to see so many of you here tonight. We've had over 100 sign-ups, and a special welcome to you if this is your first WINS event. Thank you for supporting WINS Glasgow and the Hunger Project, who will receive net proceeds from tonight's event. By coming together like this, we're amplifying our impact, improving the lives of women in projects across the world. Please introduce yourself in the chat. A lively chat box does add to the energy of the room, so please do make full use of it. Women in Sustainability is a global network for women who want to create positive change for a sustainable future. Women just like you and me who want to make a bigger impact, whether that be in our careers, in our businesses, or simply playing our part in building a better world. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kirsty Innes, and I help businesses who are doing good things in the world to amplify their impact, whether that be helping them to discover or reconnect with their purpose at an individual or an organisational level, or helping them to unite and re-energise their team around that common purpose. Or perhaps it's about building their brand anchored in their purpose, aligning it with their internal culture, or whether that be about shouting about the impact that they're making and bringing others with them on that journey. And I also lead the Glasgow Hub of Women in Sustainability on a voluntary basis. Before we dive into this theme for this evening, I want to give you a little bit of context about this. So, complete disclosure, 18 months ago, I didn't even know what COP26 was. And here we are 6 weeks away from the most important event on climate change of our time. I want to start by giving a little bit of background. For some of you, this is covering old ground, so please bear with me. And for others, this will be a useful introduction. And thanks to Anne Johnson, who's on our panel tonight, who I'll introduce you to properly shortly, for explaining this to me only a few weeks ago. So what is COP? To understand COP, we need to go back to 1992 and the Rio Earth Summit. Rio was the start of truly global collaboration on the environment and sustainable development. It was attended by political leaders and diplomats, scientists, NGOs, and civil society from 179 countries. It produced a number of outcomes, including the Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is known as the UNFCCC. And that framework has become the foundation for COP as we know it today. To put it simply, the ultimate aim of this framework was to stop dangerous human interference with the climate system. This agreed framework came into effect in 1994, which effectively became COP1. COP stands for Conference of the Parties being the signatories to the framework, which stands at 197 countries. By the time COP15 came around, which was held in Copenhagen in 2009, there was huge momentum and political will to negotiate a global climate agreement. But that didn't happen, and so Copenhagen was widely perceived as a failure. That said, some important steps were taken forward. For example, it did change the way governments perceived climate change. It raised public awareness, and the Copenhagen Agreement, or the Copenhagen Accord, which came out of COP15, set an aspirational goal of limiting global temperature increases to 2 degrees Celsius for the first time. By the time we get to 2015 and COP21 in Paris, a global agreement was reached to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius and to make every effort not to go above 1.5 degrees Celsius. And this is what we know as the Paris Agreement, which was ratified by 184 countries, which brings us bang up to date to COP26 in Glasgow. COP26 is effectively a global stocktake, where every country will have its targets and plans for achieving net zero emissions scrutinised. The challenge this time around will be to significantly increase the ambition for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, adapting to a low carbon economy and financing the transition. This is especially important for developed countries such as Scotland and the UK. And so the Glasgow Agreement will supersede the Paris Agreement. And it was only very recently that I realised just how significant this is. So will the Glasgow Agreement go down in history as a failure? Or will it be remembered as the point we finally got serious about averting the climate disaster? So let's get started, and I'll introduce our panel. So Catherine Trebeck is so if you wave, Catherine, is a senior strategic advisor for the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, which is a global collaboration that she co-founded in 2018. In the same year, she co-founded Wellbeing Economy Alliance Scotland. Catherine also instigated the Wellbeing Economy Governments Alliance, of which Scotland is a member, and developed Oxfam's Humankind Index and led Oxfam's work downscaling the donut for various countries, which is about living within planetary boundaries. And Catherine is also a member of the Scottish Government Sustainable Renewal Advisory Group. And Frances gives us a wave as well, is Chief Executive of one of Scotland's biggest credit unions, ScotWest Credit Union. And ScotWest serves communities across the west of Scotland. And Frances leads a team of around 40 staff, which provides ethical savings and fair finance to over 35,000 members. And when Frances came to the role in 2013, she comes with 26 years of financial services experience. And then we have Anne. So Anne, if you give us a wave, is an environmental and sustainability consultant. And she set up her own business, Fair Futures Partnership, in July 2020, having previously held senior management positions at global environmental and real estate consultancies. For the past year, she's been working exclusively on After the Pandemic at COP. After the Pandemic is a bold grassroots initiative to activate 4,000 square metre area of vacant and derelict land on the River Clyde as the creative, cultural and community hub for Glasgow during COP 26. And then finally we have Jo. And Jo is a chemist and the co-founder of Beauty Kitchen, a B Corp certified business on a mission to create the most effective, natural and sustainable beauty products in the world. She's her own toughest critic, inspecting everything from the efficacy of the products to the way the ingredients are sourced, right down to sustainable packaging for every product. Implementing cradle to cradle design into Beauty Kitchen's circular approach, Jo is pioneering a reuse revolution through sustainable innovation and design, and pioneering the return, refill, repeat refill stations. Jo has won many industry awards, including the Who's Who in Natural Beauty and business awards such as Scale Up Entrepreneur of the Year. And in fact, just a couple of days ago, also won this year's CEW UK Responsible Beauty Award. Okay, so now we can, well, let's get started on the videos. So the first batch, as I mentioned, I've called them the activists. So we're going to shortly hear from Katie White, who is Executive Director for Advocacy and Campaigns at WWF. Namrata Chowdhury, I think Namrata's on the call, heads up the Public Engagement Department at the global climate campaigning organisation 350.org. And finally, Claire Farrell is one of the founders of Extinction Rebellion and coordinates the mass movement of people using non-violent civil disobedience. So let's get started. So Niall, could you play the first batch of videos, please?
At COP26 in Glasgow, we're hoping for three things. Those three things are, firstly, ambition. Ambition, it's got to be about ambition. We need to make sure that the response and what comes out of this meeting and everything that's going around this meeting is commensurate with the scale of the threat we face. So ambition is key. We have to keep that crucial 1.5 degree temperature rise on the table. And that's all about, it's all about maths. It's a numbers game wrapped up in politics, but we need to make sure that the ambition is there. Effort is good, but it has to be commensurate with the scale of the threat. Secondly, and this is the title of your great event, is around action now. It has to be around action now. Action in 2050, that's a long-term goal, but it's about action now. And the key reason why action now is so important is because carbon dioxide and the other greenhouse gases stay in the atmosphere for over 100 years. So every single thing we do today stays in the atmosphere for over 100 years. So what we are suffering today in the extreme weather events we've seen in Germany, in Canada, they are a result of what's gone on before. And what we do today, what we've eaten today, where we've travelled today, everything we've done today, we are leaving that in the atmosphere. So it's action now that will make the biggest difference. So action now is key. And thirdly is to make sure that we're looking across the whole piece. It's covering all of our economy. We've done really well on some certain sectors. There's some very exciting news coming forward, very exciting shifts in terms of our transport and some of our electricity. We've seen pioneered in the UK, across Scotland and England, some real shifts and changes, and that is great. And across the globe, across the world. But there's lots of other sectors that aren't playing their role yet, and we need to make sure everyone is covered. So the food sector is key, and food is at the centre of both the climate and biodiversity crisis, which obviously is WWF's mission. So the food sector needs to be covered, and we want to make sure alongside that nature is our hero, and we celebrate nature and we invest in nature, and it is able to play its full role in mitigation and also in adaptation. So just to repeat, the three things that we're looking for is ambition, keeping that 1.5 alive, action now, and covering all sectors. And I'm really excited to be up in Glasgow, my university town, city, and go back there. And I think if it can happen anywhere, it'll happen in Glasgow.
Hello, my name is Namrata Chowdhury, and I lead public engagement at campaigning organization 350.org. I hope to see COP26 begin with a sense of urgency and end with clear commitments to the meaningful action that is required of us today. We have a critical choice to make. We are dangerously close to passing many of the tipping points that would radically alter the Earth's equilibrium. Scientists have laid out for us in grim detail what future might await us if we were to pass these planetary boundaries. In fact, we've seen several instances of this future come alive as extreme weather events have hit many parts of the globe. But the last year has offered us a rather more optimistic glimpse into the powerful future that can be built instead, as long as we can focus on a recovery plan that centers justice. Through the pandemic, we have seen just how quickly nations can mobilize resources, as long as they acknowledge a crisis as such. We have seen the power of community organizing, the reliability of localized mutual aid. We have seen a willingness to challenge what passes for normal. We've seen that the media can continue to find new ways to report on global events in a nuanced, science-based way. And perhaps most promisingly for us in the climate justice movement, we have seen that politics and profit can be put aside in favor of science, collaboration, and a focus on the greater common good. We would like to see these same learnings applied to addressing the climate crisis too. We need to see an end to fossil fuel finance and a ramping up of climate justice finance instead. We need the rich and the powerful to acknowledge what's important, to stop dithering, and to paraphrase an oft-repeated demand, to put their resources where their rhetoric has been. The very first step to initiating a rapid phase-out of fossil fuels would be to stop subsidies and funding to the polluters, and instead invest private and public wealth towards accelerating a transition to renewable energy. So far, only 2% of G20 recovery funds went to a green recovery. Half of all energy-related expenditure in COVID-19 recovery programs went straight to fossil fuels. Over $200 billion since the pandemic started. This must stop now. It is abundantly clear that fossil fuels and our dependence on them are no longer accepted as an inviolable truth. We refuse to let the world burn. We must not let corporate polluters get away with it, and we simply cannot afford to let political games be played while our futures continue to be burned. Instead, we must accelerate the transition to 100% renewable energy for all. We must do this in a way that is rooted in respect for ourselves, for each other, and for the planet. We want to forge real connections that are centered in hope, love, and justice, because that is the only way that we can bring into being the beautiful future that our hearts know is possible.
The Green campaigns and the governments have been saying for years, act now before it's too late. And now we've started to say, act now because it's too late. Because we're in breakdown and we can see it and feel it everywhere. We're in the throes of a pandemic with more expected. Flooding's killing across Europe. There've been heat warnings in the UK, a heat dome and fires killing people in America and Canada. Humidity has been killing in Pakistan. Flooding has killed people in China. The worst rains in 1,000 years. Madagascar is in drought and famine. Uganda, flooding. Guyana, flooding. London, Moscow, New York, flash flooding. We can go on, but it's clear, it's here, it's now, and it's made everyone unsafe. Some are more unsafe than others. And yet the reports in our media hear the call for more technology, for better models, for better computer predictions, is much louder than the cry to stop making it worse. And we know that the COP process so far has completely failed, and I believe it is still set up to fail because it doesn't have the mandate to change the rules of the game. It doesn't have a mandate to address the economic model, which is driving the crisis. It's always been a decade behind the Green movement. It's become a theatre of concern rather than a platform for real change. Many experts have admitted that 1.5 wasn't seen as technically credible when the Paris Agreement was signed. The latest IPCC report is saying there are no IPCC pathways which guarantee an outcome of 1.5. And we know that the Paris Agreement was signed based on made-up technology that didn't exist. So this is not simply a mistake. All of this has been predicted, and certain actors have made sure that it happened. Now we face a future of ongoing, worldwide mass death events. Basically, through its failure, the COP process is facilitating a global mass murder through consistent failure. And we know that from here on, the climate breakdown is going to get worse. And nobody who has acted intentionally to cause this has been jailed. Why not? How could they do this? And how did they seem to make us all become so complicit? I can't stress enough the harm that I believe has been done to young activists over the years as people make their way to a faraway city to wave their banners and cry out for change. Every year, receiving the message, this is the last best chance to save humanity. But I wonder, will we continue to say this even when the last shred of time is gone, when the last tipping point has been breached? Will the politicians and the economists still control the output of this process? Will there be a circus of corporate evil inside, right until up to the point when things completely collapse? Why have we allowed these people to destroy our home, our future, when there are so many more of us? There are many good people in resistance and in defence of our right to life all over the world who are being jailed and killed, but those who commit crimes against humanity don't just walk free, most of them are stinking rich. The fossil fuel executives, the finance executives are building bunkers and trying to work out how to leave the rest of humanity to starve and rot. These people who are seeking high status within a society that's clearly on a suicidal path are wearing a badge of insanity. XR was set up to call out systemic problems, and being in open rebellion against the government recognises there is a profound and catastrophic undermining of our democracy, which is on track to destroy life on Earth. We have to break out of self-deception that has allowed us to arrive here collectively. A level of self-deception and bullshit that has come from a deeply corrupt culture of lies, from a culture that says it is wedded to rationality and yet has destroyed all possibility of preserving our stable planetary systems. It's not just irrational, it's completely immoral. We have to open our hearts, continue to open each other's hearts, to want to be human again, to want to live in a humane world. But it is up to all of us And the COP leaders, I believe, have no intention of doing it for us. Nobody's coming to save us, and this is why we rebel. This is why we do civil disobedience. This is why we have chosen non-violence. And it's up to all of you. Extinction Rebellion cannot do this without you. The school strikers should not be given the responsibility to fix this. It's on all of us. Rebellion for rapid change is our best chance. And you can rebel in so many ways. You can work to your own agenda. You can give up on systems that don't work. You can refuse to let people waste your time because you are making a choice every day to maintain the lies of a dying system or to rebel for life. And it's your choice. Continuing as usual is a choice too. There are times when you have to ask yourself, which choice are you making? And that time is now.
So pretty heavy hitting stuff. Let's, if we have the panel, we'd just like to get the panel's reactions to that. So, you know, activists, environmental activists have been campaigning for decades about climate change, and often, you know, ignored or even ridiculed, and in Claire's case, arrested. But now a lot of their concerns are becoming more and more mainstream. So how influential do you feel that activism is in shifting public awareness? And now that people are more aware, you know, have they done their job? You know, is that job done? Or what does the panel think about activism as a way of being heard? Frances, do you mind if I maybe come to you first?
Yeah, sure, Kirsty. I think that the activists have been better at bringing awareness to kind of the general public. I think for myself, even coming into this event and looking at the three speakers and the videos that we've just watched, I found myself thinking, WWF, is that the people with the panda? Looking that up to see what their goal was, and it's about nature. And then if I'm honest, 350.org, I had never heard of them before today. But Extinction Rebellion, I think probably pretty much everybody has heard of them, but that is because of their approach to civil disobedience, because of the reports in the media, and you know, and what's quite sad about it is that most of the publicity is around people being annoyed because they're inconvenienced because of it, and that is hugely frustrating. Sorry. So for me, I think that activists are better at generating awareness, but for me, I would say that my eyes have only really been opened probably in the last couple of years. We've been living with recycling our rubbish and being careful about, you know, and work about shredding paper and recycling paper, but and there's just so much more needed, and I think that so many people are unaware.
So do you think, almost in a way, with activism, the end justifies the means, that, or you know, think just civil disobedience is actually, you know, the point in history we're at, it justifies it? Does Jo or one of the other, well, Frances or Jo, do you want to come in on that, or Kath?
Yes, I think when you look at all the speakers that you've got on here tonight and the way that you've grouped them, this is about galvanizing many different voices in many different audiences, in many different age groups, in many different cultures. And I think depending on your preference, you will be galvanized by a certain message. Sometimes that needs to be a really strong message, like Extinction Rebellion. Sometimes for others, it needs to be more of a political message. I mean, what does it mean to me? And I think that's where, you know, coming back to some of the points that were made, what we need to do is, the linear economy is obsolete. We know it's obsolete, but unfortunately, in our world, that's the way everyone does business. And I don't just mean business owners, I mean the way you do business, how you buy things, how you dispose of things, how you vote for people. Everything is built on a linear economy, and we know it's redundant. The challenge being is, there's not many pathways on how do you get from a linear economy to a circular economy. And that's where the big gap is. But again, for me, that's where I see the opportunity is, because you can then build those bridges and bring other people with you. And however much I would describe myself personally as an activist, the way that I do business, whether that's within sustainability, within beauty, or within my own company, is to build bridges, because it's about making the table longer, not making it shorter. And I think possibly for some people, if we look at the people that are not really interested in sustainability, so the people that don't recycle, don't care that we burn fossil fuels, don't care about any of the messages that are going to come out today, they're still the people that we need to get on the bus. You know, so whatever way you look at it, you know, they might not be in that place, but somebody has to be able to speak to them. Definitely not me.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Does anybody, Catherine, do you want to come? Yeah, Catherine.
Yeah, just ever so quickly, Kirsty, to build on Jo's initial point there around just how people absorb different types of messages framed in different ways and promoted it through different methodologies. Many years ago, I was doing a lot of research on a massive mining company and their relations with First Nations communities and their relations with around the environment, their sustainability practices. And I remember sitting down in this very fancy corporate office with their head of sustainability. And she said to me, I will open the door to the WWFs of the world because Greenpeace are downstairs protesting today. And she said, I need Greenpeace way more than I need WWF because it means I can make the case internally. And so that it's just, to me, it's an illustration of we need everyone operating at all levels of the spectrum, all places in this system. So making the messages loudly, sometimes inconveniently, unapologetically, disruptively, in order to be able to open the door for people who have got some particular solutions. And I loved Nama, that criteria for solutions of hope, love, and justice. Imagine if we had that written on the hand of every delegate to COP as they sat down around the negotiating table in a month or so's time. Hope, love, and justice for the solution. So we sometimes need disruption to kick open that table and to extend that beautiful image, Jo, of a longer table, to get people around that, to get these issues on the table, because just going nicely, we have tried that over the last few decades. So but we still need we still need conversations, we still need dialogue, but it has to be done in a way that really kicks open these conversations to a much wider audience.
Thank you very much, Catherine.
A couple of quick points, Kirsty. So the first one is about like the kind of level of awareness. I think Claire talked about the youth climate movement and the kind of harm to them of repeatedly turning up. And I think actually what Frances said about that point, there is a point I think in 2019 around Greta and the Fridays for Futures where there was definitely a big uptick in public awareness that came from what all those young people did. But it is not their job. That is not their job. They're young. This is their future. It's our job to support them. And for people, you know, that are kind of well established in their careers, and their parents and their grandparents to come forward and provide them with the support. So, you know, we can't just keep congratulating them and lauding them for like making us all aware of things that it's our responsibility to kind of teach ourselves about as well, and face up to when we already know, but it's, you know, kind of easier to just keep looking the other way. And then the second point that I wanted to make was just around the kind of the whole thing about influencing leaders and who does that, and that message. There's, you know, activism I think does play a really important role, but so do lots of other parts of society, in particular the media. And one thing that we really need to do with the messaging around the people are obviously seeing much more evidence of the climate breakdown all the time now, but it's still getting presented as being exceptional, and we have to kind of move away from that. And for a lot of people, you know, that's where they're going to get the information from. And they're not, you know, they're either not going to hear or they're not going to tune in when those messages are coming from activists, no matter where they are, and it has to come through the lines of communication that they trust.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. I mean, I think we could have a whole event just about that. So thank you very much. We're going to move on to the next batch, and I've batched these as the politicians. So we have Monica Lennon, who's Scottish Labour MSP and spokesperson on net zero energy and transport, followed by Lorna Slater, who's the co-leader of the Scottish Greens and recently appointed to the government as Minister for Green Skills, Circular Economy and Biodiversity. And then we have Nicola Sturgeon herself, First Minister of Scotland. Yeah, I couldn't believe it either when she said she was going to do this. And the first female leader of any of the devolved UK administrations. So here we go for batch 2, please.
Well, hello women in sustainability. My name is Monica Lennon. I'm a member of the Scottish Parliament and Scottish Labour's spokesperson on net zero energy and transport. And I'm proud to be a woman in politics, to be a feminist, a socialist, an environmentalist and an internationalist. And like you, proud to be a woman in sustainability. And for me, that journey began in Glasgow, the city of COP26. Many years ago when I was a young student, and it began at the University of Strathclyde when I was studying environmental planning. And that's when I really learned about the system change that we need to see in our society. And we have an economic model that has served our planet and our people very poorly. And we have political systems that want to maintain that status quo and don't want to change the power imbalance. And we know that the people who have done the least to cause climate crisis are the ones who are suffering the most and who will continue to suffer. We know that women and girls, particularly in the global south, are disproportionately impacted. So as women in sustainability, you are the placemakers, you are the change makers, you have the passion and the vision. You care about our planet and our people and our places. And I have high hopes for you, but we have to help you as politicians, as governments. You need to know that there is investment in you and your skills and in the technology that you need to do your jobs effectively. And for me, COP26 is a real moment. It is now or never, because the time to actually avert climate catastrophe is running out. And COP26 has to be about closing the gap between rhetoric and reality. You know, if we hear any more from politicians about their ambitions and their targets, you know, that is great, but actually show us how you're delivering on that. It's about delivery. And I think for us here in Scotland and the UK, to be able to go to COP26 and demand more from leaders around the world, then we have to get our own house in order. And an obvious place to start is around fossil fuel extraction. And that means saying no very loudly and clearly to Cambo. It's about showing that we do have a plan for a just transition, that we do have a plan to ensure that workers and communities are not left to fail and fall by the wayside. And for me, a big issue here in Scotland is around the future of public transport, decarbonisation, public ownership, public accountability, free public transport. So what is the legacy of COP26 going to be for Glaswegians, for people in Scotland? So we have a big opportunity. We can't afford to fail. We have to be on the right side of history. So for me, it's about action, 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 delivery, 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 and we need it to happen now.
Thank you to Women in Sustainability for the work that you do. It is vitally important that women are at the forefront of our environmental movement and politics. We are at a historic crossroads. As we come out of a global pandemic, we can and must build a fairer and greener, better world. There is no time to lose. The IPCC has said it is code red for humanity. A report from the International Energy Agency in April said that for global temperatures to stay within 1.5 degrees Celsius, there must be no new investment in fossil fuel projects. This is a global challenge that needs global solutions. But that can't be an excuse for individual governments to carry on with business as usual. Every community will be impacted, so we all have an interest in getting it right. The leaders at COP must urgently ramp up clean energy production and phase out fossil fuels as soon as possible. Science has come a long way, but the truth is that we already have a lot of the technology that can make a big difference. Far more can be invested in known technologies: rail, buses, bikes, home insulation, heat pumps, wind turbines. It's not all glamorous, but if governments do it now, they can have real practical impact. This is what will need to happen all over the world, and COP is a chance for our leaders to lay out plans and tell us how they will make it a reality. Before I was elected to the Scottish Parliament, I was a project manager in the construction of the world's largest tidal turbine. That one turbine provided hundreds of jobs and made the world a better place. What if, instead of making one turbine, we'd made 100? What if instead of making 100, we could build 1,000 of them? We have the skills and resources we need. With the right level of support, we can do so much more than we're doing now. What we can't have is more hot air. Inaction would mean more oil and gas extraction, more flash floods, and ever worsening heat waves. The pandemic has shown how interlinked our lives are and how much we rely on one another. It has also shown the catastrophic impact of waiting too long to act. We can't do that again. History books will be written about this moment. Let them tell the story of how we averted irreversible crisis, and not about how we ignored it. We can build the fairer, greener, and more sustainable world we want to see. It just needs the vision and the commitment to do it. Thank you again to everyone at Women in Sustainability. I hope you enjoy the rest of the event.
I want to send my very best wishes to everyone taking part in this Women in Sustainability event. I'm very grateful to the Network's Glasgow Hub for organising it. Of course, in just over a month's time, the eyes of the world will be on Glasgow for the start of COP26. This will be one of the most important gatherings of the century so far. And my fervent hope, like that of so many other people, is that it will be a real milestone in the fight against climate change. At the summit, we need world leaders to agree collective action to limit global warming to under 1.5 degrees. And we need them to deliver that aim in a way which is fair and just. Scotland is determined to play our part in making the summit a success. And one way we hope to do that is through the power of our example. We've already committed to achieving a just transition to net zero emissions by 2045. And by 2030, Scotland will have reduced emissions by 75% from the 1990 baseline. We're also continuing to place a very strong focus on climate justice. The consequences of global warming affect everyone, but we know that they fall most heavily on the world's poorest and most marginalised groups. And that means, of course, that women and girls around the world suffer disproportionately. That's why through our Climate Justice Fund, the Scottish Government supports projects in sub-Saharan Africa which address key issues facing women and girls. It's why ahead of COP26 we provided funding which will enable more women from the Global South to take part in the discussions. And of course it's also why we welcome an event like this one. Today is an opportunity to discuss how the issues of climate change and gender inequality intersect. And I welcome the fact that you intend to use your findings through the creation of a COP26 manifesto. We must ensure that the voices and interests of those most affected by climate change are heard loudly at the summit. That's absolutely vital in ensuring a successful and fair outcome. So I'm really grateful to all of you for taking part in this event. I want to thank all those who've helped organise it. And I look forward to working with all of you as we hopefully ensure that COP26 delivers the action and the justice that the world so badly needs.
Okay, so that sounds great. So what's the problem? What is stopping us? You know, so if the political will is there, why are we where we are? Catherine, do you want to kick us off?
So, Kirsty, I think we had 3 politicians there who do get it. I think these are women who have listened to the science and who probably genuinely understand some of the steps that need to be taken. I guess the question is, do enough other politicians get it? And I think the fact that, I mean, you were surprised when the First Minister said yes to this. I suspect, Kirsty, if you were a banker or a head of a massive, powerful corporate lobby group, you would never be surprised when the First Minister, picked up the phone to you and answered you. And what I'm getting at there is the extent to which there are certain voices shouting very, very loudly in the ear of our governments around basically doubling down on old recipes and doubling down on the old paradigm that doesn't understand the enormity of change that's required. And so, yeah, there are examples that are happening, and I think Scott, the First Minister's right, that we can point to a lot of fairly good practice that's coming out in Scotland. We can be proud of where Scotland is moving, but I often say, Scotland is awake, but she's still hiding under the covers. So at least this conversation is happening in Australia, where I'm from. There's still a huge amount of climate denial in politics. So at least we don't have that here. But are we taking the strides needed? And it's almost like, it's like a sort of, 3-year-old has taken their bag of Lego and thrown it across the floor and saying, yeah, look at that piece and look at that piece. But they haven't yet brought it together in a way that adds up to something substantial. And that's the point that I think Claire was getting at, Claire from XR, in her remarks, is that if we don't look at the root causes of some of these challenges, if we don't look upstream, and we talked about the media earlier, so often you hear the media saying, COP is coming to Glasgow. What are you doing about it? Are you doing a beach cleanup, or are you changing your light bulbs? And we keep focusing downstream on individual actions. We don't look upstream enough to the nature of the economic system that is driving all the pressure on the planet. And so we can have all the pieces of the Lego on the floor. That's great. If we don't bring them together in a way that's required to add up to systemic change, and we're not going to cut through it. And what's holding us back is those powerful voices. And I think that's why it's brilliant you began with these 3 activist voices, because only by making this noise louder and really pushing the elbow of the sort of politicians that we've heard from now, will we convince them that there is a groundswell that's more powerful than the powerful voices sneaking their way through political corridors and undermining all the messages that we want to present to them.
Yeah, thank you. So what do businesses and communities need to hear from our political leaders? I mean, if we're making all this noise, what do we need in return to help us to collectively take action? What's the leadership we're looking for?
Do you want to come to Jo on that one for a business?
Jo?
Yeah, so I mean, really, I don't have much to add, because until the economics actually change. So for instance, if anybody has read Naomi Klein's book, This Changes Everything, it really gets into the nuts and bolts of the World Trade Organization and how big the change has to be. So, a lot of the times you try and influence what you can as a small business, for instance, but you're still coming up against legislation and regulation that is outmoded and outdated. If I give you an example, yes, so we have a reusable packaging program, which means that you never own the bottle, you only own the shampoo that's inside, and you give us the bottle back and we wash it and clean it. That bottle, legislatively wise, is not classed as an asset. And we at the moment, that's just an example of a challenge that I'm facing as a business, but I know every other business will be facing these difficulties in trying to move from a linear economy to a circular economy. And until politicians really get under the skin of that, and that has to happen at a global level, not just at a national Scottish level or a UK level, because the World Trade Organization is putting blockers. China had one of the biggest solar manufacturing systems sites in place, and the European Union and Canada challenged it, so they had to close it down. And then they opened another one up in Canada, and then another couple of countries closed it down because they said that it was going against the trade requirements. So if you are actually trying to do something within the renewable space, or the circular economy space until the linear economy is broken down from a regulation and legislation. It's really hard to get to those big changes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And Frances, if there's anything you'd like to add, or we can move on to the next batch.
Yeah, just one quick thing, which Lorna said it's not all glamorous, and that is completely right. And that, you know, there's a lot of things in terms of like that what sort of local, you know, people and small businesses and things need to see. You know, that it's decarbonising heat, like better insulation in houses, and then you have things like the Green Homes Grant, which was a total disaster. Because it was rolled out so badly. You know, the estimates are it's going to cost, like, the number, because of the very small number of properties that went through, it's going to cost about £1,000 per one. You know, absolutely, it's just like wild how wrong that went. But it's also quite a good, you know, Nicola Sturgeon talked about Scotland's reduction in its CO2 from the 1990 baseline, which is 75%, which is really good, but that is almost all entirely in electricity, in our energy supply, and other sectors like the built environment, like transport, particularly heat, have made no progress at all. And there's also, you know, when you look at the kind of like the number of girls and women that are, you know, girls studying STEM subjects and young women graduating in them and going into those jobs, that has steadily increased, but it's still only at about 35%. And when you look at industries like construction, that's where the numbers are lower. So there's a kind of overall picture, particularly in Scotland, which looks quite good, but when you actually look at the detail, there are certain parts that where it is really, really bad, and a huge amount of work is still needing to be done. And there is definitely a corollary between the number of women that are involved at senior levels in these parts of the economy and the innovation and drive and commitment towards sustainability and net zero.
Great. Gosh, so I think each of these topics, we can have a whole event about each of them. But we have another batch of videos. So the third batch, we've called it What Do We Need to Do? So and we have another three voices. So first up we have Hunter Lovins, who's a Texan rancher. She's quite a hoot. She's president of Natural Capitalism Solutions. We have Aileen McLeod, I think, who might be on the call. And she was formerly with an MSP, she's been an MEP, and was formerly a Minister for Environment and Climate Change and Land Reform. And finally, Joanna Yarrow, who's a Campaigns Director for Human Nature and Strategy Director also for M&C Saatchi, and had a very successful career as well with IKEA. And she was headed up the global head of sustainable and healthy living at IKEA. So I think we're ready for the third batch.
Hi, my name is Hunter Lovins. I'm a Colorado rancher. I'm also the president of Natural Capitalism Solutions. We work with companies, communities, countries around the world, helping them implement more regenerative practices profitably. I've been working on climate issues for a very long time, long enough that if I were any damn good, we'd have solved these problems. My first book on climate was in 1981. And since then, of course, the climate crisis has gotten ever worse. I wear on my hat the pin from the Kyoto Conference of Parties. When we thought we solved the climate crisis, we thought we put in place a global market to reduce emissions, to make it profitable for people to do the right thing. We were wrong. And now the climate crisis is evident to everyone, whether it be the wildfires now raging across the American West, or Siberia, or parts of Europe, the floods that have hit China and Western Europe and Colorado. A couple of weeks ago, 5 people were killed in a flash flood from a rain bomb. Now, we've always had flooding, we've always had rain, we've always had drought and fire nothing like what we have today. And so people are coming to recognize that we are in a global climate crisis. Indeed, we're in a planetary emergency. I serve on the Club of Rome's executive committee and on the steering committee of Partners for a Planetary Emergency. We put forth a plan to tackle the interrelated crises of loss of biodiversity, of inequality, of climate change. And we know how to do this. The good news is we have the solutions and they are slowly being implemented. Way too slowly. I wrote a book with some colleagues a few years ago called A Finer Future, Creating an Economy in Service to Life, where we laid out how to use renewable energy, which is now everywhere on Earth cheaper than fossil energy. And that will solve roughly half of the climate crisis. If we eliminate emissions, and analysts like Tony Seba at RethinkX argue that for fundamental economic reasons, by 2030, the world will be 100% renewably powered. Assume Tony's wrong by a decade, you're still a decade ahead of when the UN said we had to get it done. But again, that's only half the solution. The other half is regenerative agriculture, is managing animals on grazing lands in ways that take carbon out of the air and put it back into the soil. And we know how to do this if we practiced what's called holistic management on the world's grasslands. Over 30 to 60 years' time, we could get back to 280 parts per million concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. That is the pre-industrial level. That's the level in which humans evolved, in which we have thrived. And we know from the geological record, from the biological record, that it was the world's grasslands that decarbonized the planet before, when concentrations of CO2 were even higher than they are today. Yes, it's critically important that we keep standing forests standing. It's very important that we reduce and eliminate our use of unnecessary plastics, the production of which and the degradation of which emit carbon. Yes, it's important that we control the other industrial gases. And a lot of good work is being done on this. But the two big picture solutions are implement renewable energy and implement regenerative agriculture. Both of these are more profitable than the way we do business today. So that's the good news. We can solve this problem. We can solve this problem at a profit. What's holding us up?
Glasgow is shaping up to be the most significant global climate conversation since Paris in 2015, but time is not on our side. I mean, right now we're seeing the devastating impacts of the converging health, climate, biodiversity loss crisis. Extreme weather events are happening more frequently. For example, the recent devastating floods across Europe, deadly wildfires and heat waves, and of course the latest IPCC report that has issued a code red for humanity. So all the evidence is clear. The climate emergency is happening now, and we don't have time for any more incrementalism. Now, 6 years on from Paris, and we're still not where we should be. We haven't moved fast enough, and a huge gap remains between what we urgently need to do and what is actually being done. So COP26 must shift the bar the way that Paris did and lock down significant global commitments from governments that can actually be delivered in the early 2020s to get us on the right pathway for 1.5 degrees. And these commitments must entail bolder transformative actions, enabling us to really start to shift away from the existing outdated economic system and its relentless pursuit of GDP growth at all costs that is pushing us towards ecological collapse and that has pushed so many of our societies into deepening inequality. This is the challenge before the Glasgow COP, where there is a huge opportunity for leaders to change the dial on the road to real system change that prioritises the health and well-being of people and planet. Now, people cannot and they must not be left behind as we move to address this existential crisis. You know, the transition to net zero must have social justice at its heart. You know, tackling climate change involves delivering a greater measure of social justice at a global level, not as a side product, but as an integral part of a fundamental change in the relationship between the economic system and our planet. And so for me, solidarity, social justice, and a wellbeing economy must be at the heart of COP26. Now, the wellbeing economy governments that currently comprise Scotland, Iceland, New Zealand, Wales, and Finland are shifting to a more holistic wellbeing economic model with the well-being of people and planet at its core, in line with the Paris Climate Agreement and the UN SDGs. And at COP26, there's a huge opportunity for the well-being economy governments to act as the drivers of transformational change, championing the principles and objectives of a well-being economy to really push for bolder climate ambition and to encourage other countries to follow their lead. This is the decade of transformation and delivery, and Scotland is well placed to lead the transformational change at COP26 that is so urgently needed. And in doing so, it has the opportunity to act as a beacon in the world to a well-being economy.
So much of the climate crisis is rooted in how we live. It's the result of decades and decades of choices that we make around our lifestyles every day. Choices that were often unconscious or made on our behalf, but it's in the details of our everyday lives that the problem has sat. And I think that's where we need to fix the problem as well. So my hope is that COP26 can focus on those areas of everyday impact and on finding ways to really radically accelerate the move to low carbon sustainable living for as many people as possible. It's about the infrastructure, industries, products and services so often unseen that support our lifestyles. So we need to empower and enable individuals and organisations to take action in their own sphere, in their everyday choices, to make low carbon sustainable living affordable, attractive and accessible, genuinely mainstream. So when we look at our carbon footprints, particularly here in the West, in high impact countries, you can see that the big contributors are actually very simple everyday things. It's the energy we use, it's the stuff that passes through our hands, it's the food that we eat, it's the way that we get around. So that's where I think the solutions lie. I hope that COP26 will focus on how we can radically mainstream low carbon living in those areas. And I think a key example of this is actually about how we design and run our places. If we think about it, the way places are built, the way that they're designed, the infrastructure, the services that are there can actually make it easy, affordable, attractive and accessible to live a low carbon lifestyle. They can inspire us, they can enable us, but they can also make it really difficult for the individual to behave in a low carbon way. They can disempower, they can disable. So we need to think about, yes, buildings. There's masses we need to do to retrofit fast, but it's not just about the buildings. It's about the way our places are laid out. It's about the policies that are used to run them and prioritise the services that are there. All about using radically less energy and renewable, reducing food waste, shifting to a plant-based diet, getting around differently, making walking and cycling the norm. Fantastic public transport and private car use, EV or not, the last priority. So places can inspire and enable and accelerate low carbon living, and I think that's a really important place for us to focus. And of course we need the accelerators for change, for speed and for scale. We need policy shifts, we need capital shifts, we need culture shifts, and we need political power through place and everything that supports it to radically mainstream sustainable low carbon living.
Okay, so a lot in that as well. So let's start with Hunter's comment that she said that all we need is renewable energy and regenerative agriculture. Is that all we need to fix the problem? Jo?
So all of the videos so far are another piece in the jigsaw, and that's where, you know, sustainability, net zero, COP26, it's complicated. We're all here tonight because it's complicated. We want to be able to find out from other people, is there a simpler way of doing things, a simpler solution? And I think one of the great things about today is the questions that everyone is asking in the chat, and the questions that we're all asking ourselves and thinking, well, how do we, coming back to Catherine's great point about putting that Lego back together? And that's where we have the opportunity to influence, you know, the way that we can. When we set up our business, I just couldn't understand why, you know, any accountant that you speak to only wants to talk about the money. And I couldn't get my head around, why is that the only thing that as an owner of a business, I need to be worried about? You know, it doesn't make sense to me. And that's why, you know, we're B Corp certified. It's people, planet, profit. It's written into our articles of association, and it's the triple bottom line, because the money aspect is irrelevant if you don't look after the other things. That's just an output. Anybody can make money. I could go and clean people's houses and charge them for it and make money from it. You know, that's the easy part. The difficult part is looking at people and looking at the planet and how we fit those together to be able to still live, you know, a happy, fulfilling life. And, you know, I think we do have an opportunity to do this here. I think it's amazing that Scotland is one of the leading countries for the well-being economy. Again, the book that I talked about, Naomi Klein's book, is talking about the old-fashioned 9 to 5, Monday to Friday days that we work. That was set when women didn't work. Yeah, those hours were set when women were at home because they had to look after the children. And yet now, both of us, both partners are out working Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And it's not made for the future that we want to build. So, you know, for me, what I've looked at is, what can I influence? And I can influence the way that people engage with my business and how they work here. We pay above the real living wage. Everybody has the same benefits. It doesn't matter what job you do, what hours you do, everyone has the same benefits. And I know that's only one aspect of social fairness, but again, we're niche. There's 6 million businesses in the UK, 4 million of them are SMEs, 520 of them are B Corp certified, and 112 have a circular business model. We are so niche. However, we can prove what's possible. And that's really what today is about. And I think the 3 videos were just, you know, I am so energized from that.
Great. Yeah, I mean, the government are talking about green growth and building back better. And you know, is green growth even a thing? I mean, is that possible, that you can grow and it's sustainable, or is it more?
We've proved it, and that's Beauty Kitchen has proved it. We are self-funded. We've no external investment. We've never made a loss. Okay, our profits, we've only been trading since 2014. Our profits are not huge because everything goes back into research and innovation. But we are here to demonstrate to people it's profitable. And you know, beauty's quite a sexy business. We're not in renewable energy. Not that I'm saying that there's anything. Yeah, I am. It's really unsexy to be in renewable energy, but it matters. It really matters. And I think we need more businesses to say it can work.
Yeah, thank you very much. unless I'm just really conscious of the time, so does anyone want to just wrap up that? Catherine, you seem you're like itching to.
Yeah, your question on green growth. I mean, this is the excuse that we get to not look at the fact our economic system is designed for and dependent on growth. And Aileen McLeod was the first one to point the figure at how our system and all the policies underneath it have GDP growth as their ultimate aim. There's things around the margins, of course. It's not that simple, but override, when it comes to the crunch, GDP is the way we think about progress and success. When we talk about economic recovery, how do we measure that? Through GDP per capita. And so the green growth conversation is basically, look over there, we can decouple. But and there is some progress in decoupling. The UK's got a relatively good story to tell on that in terms of carbon, only in terms of carbon, largely ignoring imported emissions and not nearly fast enough. But as we heard from Nima earlier, this is about planetary boundaries, and carbon is only one aspect of that. We have to look at biodiversity question, our nitrogen cycles, land use change, species loss, those sorts of things as well. And the problem is that we cannot decouple fast enough or on the scale that's required. And so the easier conversation is to say, look at our economics models that are designed for growth, open up our imaginations to think about an economy that is better than growth, invest in sort of businesses like Joe's, where they're using profit as a vehicle to deliver the goals themselves, not to grow faster and make a shed load of money, to be commercially viable, yes, but that's not the goal in and of itself. It's what's the impact we want to have. And that's what we need to ask of the economy. What sort of economy do we need that serves those higher order goals, rather than just having all of us as little worker bees in service of economic extraction? Same for the environment. I could keep talking about that more, Kirsty, but I'll shut up there.
Yeah, I'm just really conscious of the time because we've still got another batch to go. And as I say, each of these batches of videos could be a topic for a whole event on its own. So we're just going to have to sort of keep sort of light touch on each of these. So if it's all right, we'll move on to the fourth and final batch. So these ones I've called Legacy, Community and Future Generations. So we have Councillor Susan Aitken, who's the leader of Glasgow City Council. And then Catherine, you're going to have to bear watching yourself. So Catherine submitted a video before she agreed to be on the panel. And then Sophie Howe, who is the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales. So we'll play this fourth and final batch.
Hi, I'm delighted to send my very best wishes and solidarity to the organisers and participants in the Women in Sustainability event. Over the past year, it's been a real honour to promote Glasgow on a global stage. Our status as COP26 host has generated an interest in our city far and beyond anything in our recent history. The world wants to know about Glasgow, our backstory, challenges and crucially what we can bring in November to this most critical and urgent of world gatherings. One milestone that has particularly pleased me is that the United Nations-backed local government and municipal authorities constituency of COP incorporated what they dubbed the Glasgow message, our insistence that climate justice and social justice must go hand in hand. The conjoining of climate and social justice is as relevant here in Glasgow as it is anywhere. It's Glaswegians in our most socially challenged communities who will suffer most from the impacts of climate change while contributing least to it. And every one of you here today knows that it's women who then suffer doubly the burden of inequality. The impact on the lives of ordinary Glaswegians as the world transitions to net zero is my central concern. Profound change is coming and it will impact on so many aspects of everyday life. And as climate action becomes mainstreamed within the physical, social and economic fabric of Glasgow, then so too does justice and equality. So, as industries change and new sectors emerge to meet the needs of our new green economy, we need to ensure that girls coming through our schools have the confidence and the STEM skills to embrace those opportunities. As we decarbonise transport, all our focus can't be solely on private electric vehicles. We need to recognise that the vast majority of women in our city rely on public transport, and we need new services, new modes and new routes which will meet both climate targets and their needs. And as we modify hundreds of thousands of homes so they better hold heat and no longer rely on oil and gas, we also address fuel poverty, a social justice issue that affects many single parent and single pensioner households, by far the largest number of which are women. The world wants a Glasgow Agreement, our city's name synonymous with the moment our planet changes course for a more sustainable future. I want it to also be the defining moment for modern Glasgow. COP can be our platform for a greener, healthier and more prosperous Glasgow. It can also be the catalyst for a more equal one, with climate justice, social justice and gender justice all going hand in hand. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Catherine Trebek from the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and one of the things I'm, most excited about the COP is that it's happening in Glasgow, because of course Glasgow is a city that is famous for its hospitality. All the comedians, all the musicians always say that Glasgow is the best audience, and Glasgow is also famous for its passion and its global solidarity and its empathy and its sort of fire in the belly over those issues. And I think that's going to really be vital as all the decision makers and powerful politicians from around the world come to Glasgow in November, because we need those people also to have the fire in their belly, particularly around the question of social justice, because climate change is a social justice question, whether that's a story of who has the most impact in terms of driving climate destruction, and also, of course, in terms of who it is who's most affected, in terms of those inequalities. It is so much the most vulnerable around the world who are hit hardest and earliest, and who have least resources to cope with the impact of climate breakdown. And so we have to have the question of climate justice and social justice at the heart of the climate negotiations. And those two things are very much linked by the economy. And so it has to be a conversation about how do we transform our economic systems, the purpose, the role of business. And so the Glasgow Agreement, the document that will come out of the Glasgow COP, will fail if it doesn't have resources for those who are most affected to withstand the impact of climate breakdown that's happening now. But it will also fail if it doesn't put the ball firmly in the court of the most powerful, those with the most resources, and those who have been most responsible for the roots of our environmental breakdown. We need to put the mirror on them, put the light on them in terms of their efforts and their resourcing of what needs to be done. So for me, this COP, my profound sense of what, my profound hope of what this COP needs to be about is that it has the question of social justice, and that the negotiators become a little bit like Glaswegians when they sit around those tables in those negotiations, and that they remember that they're most vulnerable, whether it's here in Scotland or around the world, that they're the people that they need to have at the forefront, and they also need to have their eyes on those who have done very, very well out of an economic system that has done so much damage, because they're the people who need to really, really step up and make the changes in their own behaviour if we're going to have a Glasgow Agreement that is really up to the challenges facing the world. Thank you so much.
I'm Sophie Howe and I'm the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales. Wales is the first country in the world to have legislated to protect the interests of future generations, to set out a selection of 7 national long-term wellbeing goals that don't change from one political cycle to the next. The first country, if you like, to try to tackle short-termism in politics and policy making. And there's a huge opportunity here in terms of what our world leaders will commit to in COP. Let's face it, we've let future generations down. We haven't had our children, our great-grandchildren and those yet to be born at the forefront of our minds when we're taking decisions on how we tackle the climate emergencies, nature emergencies and how we think about building a new economic system for the future. But the time has come, our future generations have been calling us out. My role in Wales is to act as the guardian of the interests of future generations and hold our government to account on how they're taking decisions in their interests. Just a few weeks ago, the United Nations Secretary General said that he would embed a future generations governance framework and a special envoy for future generations in the UN governance infrastructure. I want to see every country in the world follow our lead in Wales, follow the lead of the United Nations, and to put in place that system of governance which turns short-termism on its head and make sure that we are leaving the world better than we found it.
Okay, so a lot of information there. So I'll come to you, Anne, because this is kind of your sort of area. What do you hope Glasgow's legacy specifically will be for the world and for Scotland and for the city and for individuals within Glasgow?
I mean, you talked at the beginning, Kirsty, about what COP is and where it came from and everything, and we've talked a lot about Paris. But there is a COP every year. So since Paris, there's been one in Bonn, there's been one in Marrakesh, there was one in Katowice, and then last year it was supposed to be in Santiago and it ended up getting moved at the last minute to Madrid. And I mean, the reason I mention that is because, that Glasgow has had, as Catherine said, host lots of things. It's well known as a host city. Had the Commonwealth Games, which was like a massive success. And if COP had gone ahead last November when it was supposed to, it is one of the biggest things that's going to ever have happened in Glasgow, even with fewer people coming because of COVID. But the opportunities for Glaswegians and Scots and to actually participate in it are actually quite limited, and that is the whole purpose in the project that I'm involved in. That's what we've been trying to do, is create that space where those community conversations can happen, but also create that kind of empowered citizen that then realizes that they can hold the people that are in the negotiations to account. But what I would really like to see is that rubs off on COP itself, and that there's a realization that I think that they do have to think about its own impact and whether it should be happening. And there's always a difference with the ones that come every 5 years. So COP26 was always going to be different to all those ones that happen every year. But I think there has to be a really hard look at how it happens as an event, who gets to participate in it, how it engages and for how long, and in the build up with its host city, and listens to the stories of those cities, because there's a lot about Glasgow being a post-industrial city, that looking at the impact of the decline of coal and steel and iron and steel and all of that on the west of Scotland generally, and the impacts of that we still see now, how that was dealt with and how it's resonated over generations. Coming to kind of Sophie's point, we still see that now in lots of communities in Glasgow, and those are the things that, with it being there, that I would think that the delegates and the policymakers and the leaders, that if they are able to kind of actually somehow get that spirit of Glasgow, I hope it's taken some of that away of kind of looking at how the lessons of that city can be taken forward when COP happens. Next year it'll be in an African city. It just needs to be much more about actually speaking with and to people, rather than lots of kind of like closed group things talking about how those people are then subsequently going to be engaged. And that's the way that you get to Susan's point about the social and the gender and the climate justice all coming together.
Yeah, thanks. And Frances, you deal the credit union, it deals with the financially excluded. You're dealing with it. What at the moment, do you think that they're even aware of COP26? I mean, do you think it's going to have any impact on them? How disconnected are they to what's, or I'm putting words in your mouth, but to what's going on in the city in 6 weeks' time?
Well, so as a credit union who's actually based in Glasgow, not that far from where the conference will happen, it's actually pretty disappointing in terms of how that's been harnessed in Glasgow. Where has been the momentum? How have businesses been allowed to be involved in that? And the answer is, as far as I can see, we haven't. We work with some of the poorest communities across the west of Scotland, and it's heartbreaking to see how some people are living and trying to decide whether they can buy food or whether they can buy a pair of shoes for their kids to go to school. And we can do what we can do to help them financially as best as we can, but we're only a little part of the solution. And I would hope to see that we find a way forward now in Glasgow and find a way to make COP, not just make a difference for the world, but in our little part of the world in Glasgow and the west of Scotland. How's that going to be different? And I would say that for our members who are worrying about whether they can put food on the table, it's unlikely that they even really understand the huge impact that some good positive actions from a Glasgow agreement, how it could make a difference to their lives. And I don't think that they can see that at the moment, because all they're worried about is the food or the shoes for their kids or whatever these real difficult things that they're living through.
Yeah, that brings things back to earth, really, doesn't it? With a bump. I'm keen to get on. We've had a lot of questions, but just in one sentence for each of you, if you can do that, because we can move on to the question Q&A. What would you hope that we've got this moment in time? What do you want future generations to say about this moment in time? What do you hope they would say? What would be the legacy? Catherine, or just literally.
I would hope that they would say that it's a Glasgow Agreement that is worthy of the title Glasgow Agreement, because I think, as I said in the video, I think Glaswegians understand inherently social justice and they understand the need for bold action. So I don't want it to be a Glasgow Agreement that dilutes the idea of Glasgow. It has to have the sort of heart and soul of Glasgow on every single page of the text. And if future generations see that, then we can really be proud of it.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else before we go to mute the
I
Q&A?
mean, I think for me it would be an enlightenment to decouple from fossil fuels. But I know everybody talks about it, but it's everywhere. It is part of everything that we do, everything that we buy, everything that we see. Everything goes back to fossil fuels. And I would love this to be the COP where we say no more.
Okay, thank you. And Frances, anything before we?
Yeah, for me, it's the agreement, whatever the agreement is. I hope it's a success, but that that future generations also look around and saw that we didn't stand on ceremony, and that we stepped up and tried to do our bit to make sure that there was a legacy, regardless of what the text of the agreement ends up being.
Thank you. And Frances, you get the last word.
Yeah, I would just like it to be that pivotal point where things change, and it would be great for the city that I've been born and bred in. I would just love for it to be synonymous with that moment in time when we made a difference.
Brilliant. That's a great note to end on. Thank you. So I had hoped to finish by 2:30. Obviously, I said at the beginning that we're scheduled to finish about 2:45. So I hope you can still stay on, and we'll try and get through as many questions as we can. So see if this Mentimeter has worked. So if we call up the the Mentimeter. And if you see a question there that you want to upvote, and we'll just try and we'll set the timer for maybe 10 minutes, so we can try and get through as many of these questions as we can. And if we can try and answer as briefly as we can, so we can get through as many as we can. We've got two other Women in Sustainability Hub leads on the call. So we've got Claire and Talia. So what we're going to hope is that even if your question isn't answered, there's loads and loads of ideas for future events and content for them to pick up. So the first one here, which seems to have 13 votes, what can we do to keep the leaders accountable to the goals they set at COP26? Great question. So who would like to take that? Catherine, maybe?
I think that's one for Anne's expertise.
Right, okay.
Nicely done. Yeah, what can we do? Well, I think we just need to keep we need to keep speaking up, and we need to keep that we need to keep making them aware of this, making them realise that this matters and that it's not going to go away. And it's not just about who you vote. Well, it's not about who you vote for, really. I mean, we see that in the political system that we've got in this country, but that pressure, it does affect change, because you're seeing lots of I in the work that I do, I do a lot that's in commercial property, where there's a lot of like big money and investment going around, and there's a huge amount of pressure coming from investors, and that pressure is because they're seeing it from things like who's going, what tenants are looking for in the buildings and things like that. So because they're starting to see it hitting their pockets, they're putting pressure on political leaders as well. So you might think it doesn't matter, but it does. So if you keep speaking up and you keep making choices, like to use Beauty Kitchen, to whatever it is, then that accumulates into something that will lead to action.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to the next question. We'll just try and get through as many of these as we can. Then, if COP26 isn't going to bring the results, what is the alternative? Another good question. Anyone like to take that? What's the next?
I'm happy to dive in, but
Okay.
as Pauline, I mean, this stuff isn't just about COP. So whether it's a brilliant agreement or otherwise, that's not the start and end of this conversation. So we need to focus on what's happening at national governments, at local governments, as the third speaker in the previous section, Joanne, I think her name was talking about, design of cities. But one of the big things is to question how we design our economic systems. I've said that a lot, so I won't go into it again, but I think that is what will either take a good agreement and get to implement it, or make up for a pretty ordinary, lackluster agreement. If we really take seriously, this is how we design our economies, whether they're purpose for collective well-being, whether they're about preventing harm from the beginning rather than spending so much money healing and patching up, whether we're asking more of our businesses in terms of delivering the sort of social justice and environmental outcomes we want, and whether they've got people at the heart of the decision making around how we set up the economy, whether it's economic democracy at its heart. They're the sort of questions we need to be asking regardless of what happens in COP. We can't it's going to be busy and it's going to be nuts and it's happening here, but it's also not the be all and end all. There's a shed load more we need to be doing after COP finishes.
Yeah, putting it into context. Thank you. So let's try another question. This is quite exciting because I don't know what's coming up. It's just going to pop up on the screen. Much of the success of Paris was attributed to Cristina Figueres and her team. Is there an equivalently effective, inspiring person and team behind the scenes at Glasgow? Well, I can take this one if you like, on the basis that, well, I emailed them maybe 4 or 5 times and didn't even get a response from the COP team, and that's having trying to find an email in the first place. So it's a bit like, and yeah, I have had not even a no, we won't contribute. I haven't even had a response So
Kirsty, I'll just add one. Christiana's going to be here, and our partners at TJ Hutton Institute are hosting a talk for her on the 2nd, the Tuesday. So I think that's live online now if you want to hear from her. In my mind, and will correct me because she's much more expert on this, I think John Kerry's role really, really matters as Biden's climate envoy, and how he negotiates with China, and how if he ignores people like, the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison, who's now even saying can't be bothered to turn up. But I think John Kerry is one of the key people to really broker something powerful.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Got time for maybe another couple of questions. Next question. If COP26 isn't going to bring the results, we've had that one, I think, have we? Are there many COP26 related events happening alongside COP other than the UK events at Strathclyde Uni?
Yes.
Yeah, there's lots of fringe events.
Yeah.
There's loads. I mean, as I said, there's probably the number that are going to be like genuinely accessible to everybody is maybe debatable, but there are going to be loads, and there's going to be lots of resources. So Glasgow City Council have a body called Sustainable Glasgow, which is putting a website together, which has lots of different projects on it. That's one place that you can go and look for information. On our website, on the After the Pandemic website, there'll be lots of information as well. So Izzy saying, is kind of on this call, who's engaging with us, there will be the COP26 Coalition, that's an umbrella organisation for lots of kind of activist groups, and they're organising loads and loads of stuff. So yeah, there'll be a lot going on, and as Catherine says, the place is going to be absolutely mental. But that's that's a good thing, but it's also a slight concern as well, because I think there might be a message that's kind of getting out at the moment for a lot of people where it's just stay away from the city centre, and a lot of the people that do that are actually the people that we want to be reaching and engaging in the conversation.
Okay, thank you for that. So we'll have one more question, and then I think we'll need to bring it to a close. Do you think COP26 will meet expectations? A lot is hanging in the balance, but no one seems particularly hopeful about a strong result. Well, I think that's what the whole event's been about, I guess. Yeah, we're very hopeful, and there's a lot going on. Does anybody, one of the panel, want to come in on that?
I mean, I think there's a big driver with everything from a media perspective, and there does seem to have been a lot more changes, but a lot more just needs to happen. I do think that anything that's within the political space, when you're bringing many different countries together, no one is ever, it's all, dare I say it, it's like the Olympics or the Commonwealth Games. You might have the superpowers that you think are going to win all the medals, but actually you're then surprised by the up and coming that happens. And I think COP26 in Glasgow will be very similar to that.
Okay, I think that's a really good question to end on, if everyone's happy with that. I don't know how many more questions, I can't really see how many more questions there are besides that, but I think 19, thank you. So I think what I can do is pass some of these questions on to the other WINS hub leads, and there's, I think, loads of content here that maybe some of the other hubs can pick up, and we can maybe run some other events based on some of these themes and questions that you have. Okay, so what I'd like to do now, just to bring us to a close, is just to sort of take, there's been a huge amount of information in a very, very short time, and just to take a moment to kind of pause and almost digest some of this information and reflect. Can you go to the next slide, please? And could you just take a few minutes just to just sit back and share one action or insight that you'll take away as a result of tonight's event? So maybe it was a quote or something somebody said, maybe it was something from one of the videos, maybe it was something that you feel that you can take action on right now, or maybe it's something you're going to give more thought to, so we can try and get a sense of where everyone's at and what the impact that this event has had, really. So I should say this is in Mentimeter. Yeah, beg your pardon. Yeah. So if you go back to Mentimeter, and we can just take a few minutes of quiet just to read some of these comments. Buy shampoo from the beauty kitchen. Hope, love and justice. Yeah, Talia from Oxford wins. Yeah, we'll pick up on that. Yeah, some of these are great. Leave despondency behind, engage with the COP and keep the spotlight shining on leaders to do what is right. Making the table bigger. Absolutely. Yeah, it's to spark even more conversation with everyone I meet about the what's, the where's and the whys of environmental responsibility. Teresa, I will call my US senators today. Absolutely. So urge them to prioritise climate solutions in the next 2 bills headed to the president's desk with no fossil fuels. So Teresa's in here from America, good friend. Communicate what's happening, encourage involvement. Yeah, short-termism and policy making. Okay. So if you keep those coming on the Mentimeter, we'll be able to capture those, and I'll be able to send those out with the recording for tonight. So just keep those coming in, and as I wrap up. So typically what I would try and do at this stage is summarize all that we've discussed tonight, but I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. So instead what I did was that I held one of the videos back because when I watched it for the first time, I immediately knew that this was the message that I wanted to end on. Before I do that, I'd just like to thank Catherine, Francis and Jo. So thank you so much for being on the panel and for giving so much of your time, and for actually keeping me right as well. And thanks to Lizzie and Claire for looking after the chat, and Niall, who's been in the background handling all the tech, and he's a boy, and for taking all this tech worry off me. And special thanks to Donna, for your friendship and constant support. One last thing I need to say is that this is actually my last Women in Sustainability event as I'm stepping down. If anybody is interested in taking over the Glasgow Hub licence, let me know, and I'll put you in touch with Rianne, who runs the network. I've really enjoyed putting on these events, and I hope we can all stay in touch, and because I've got plans for what happens next, which I'm very excited about. So please, we'll keep in touch, and do message me anytime. And so to our very, very last event video, it's only 2 minutes long, and we're going to close with Katharine Hayhoe. So Katharine Hayhoe is a prominent climate scientist, and she's based in Texas, which is one of the leading oil producing states in the US. Again, when I approached Katharine Hayhoe to do one of these videos, I didn't actually realise that she's quite a celebrity, and I didn't really realise that. And maybe if I did, I wouldn't have asked her. So she's got a TED talk called "The Most Important Thing You Can Do to Fight Climate Change is Talk About It." So it's a great YouTube TED talk, which is well worth watching. And she's just released a book called "Saving Us: A Climate Scientist's Case for Hope and Healing in a Divided World." So Katharine Hayhoe is going to bring us beautifully full circle So thank you for coming, and it's been amazing to have so many of you on this call. So actions speak louder than words. High hopes for COP26, and Catherine is going to play us out.
Hi, my name is Catherine Hayhoe, and I'm a climate scientist. Over the last few years, the number one question I hear wherever I go, no matter who I'm speaking to, is this: what gives you hope? So often we look for hope in the headlines, and we don't find them there. Every new science headline that comes out, it seems like, says that things are worse than we thought, or changing faster than we thought, or affecting us to a greater extent than we thought. The headlines are full of massive hurricanes, out-of-control wildfires, floods, heat waves, droughts, and more. When it comes to climate change, where do we find hope? Often we feel like we have to wait for hope to find us before we act, but it turns out it's exactly the opposite. By acting, we find hope. We find out about others who are acting. We find out that climate change is not a giant boulder sitting at the bottom of a steep hill with only a few hands on it. We understand that climate action is a boulder that's already at the top of the hill. It's already rolling down the hill in the right direction. It already has millions of hands on it. It just needs to get going faster. Science even provides some hope, knowing that, yes, some impacts are already here today, and we must build resilience, adapt to, prepare for the impacts that it's too late to avoid. But the future is in our hands. The latest report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is crystal clear. It is our choices that will determine our future. We are the ones who have the ability to act. And when I say we, I mean everyone. Because how did the world change before? With slavery, with women getting the vote, with civil rights. It wasn't because a president or a prime minister or a celebrity or a CEO decided it had to. It was because ordinary people said this is not the way the world should or can be. It must change. And how do we do that? By using our voices to talk about why it matters, what we can do to fix it, and how, working together, we truly can find that better world.